I sold your car. 4 words delivered with such casual cruelty that at first I thought I'd misheard my son. Ethan, what did you say? My voice sounded strange in the quiet kitchen of our lakeside home in Portland, too high and thin against the steady hum of the refrigerator Thomas had fixed just 3 weeks before his heart gave out. I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story from. I want to know how far it's traveled, because this story is going to leave you speechless. The Subaru mom. I sold it yesterday, got $8,000 for it, which is pretty good for a 10-year-old car. The satisfaction in his voice made my stomach clench. I've already put the money into an account I set up to manage your finances. You need to be practical now that Dad's gone. I gripped the counter to steady myself, staring at the faded wallpaper Thomas and I had hung together when we first bought this small house 26 years ago. The Subaru had been Thomas's pride, a reliable sedan he'd maintained meticulously, teaching me basic maintenance so I'd never be stranded or taken advantage of by unscrupulous mechanics. But I need that car for work, I managed to say, trying to keep the panic from my voice. The hospital is across town. There's no direct bus route. Ethan's sigh crackled through the phone, impatient and dismissive. Mom, be realistic. You're 58. Should you even be working at your age? Besides, the insurance and maintenance would have been too expensive for you on your own. On my own, I repeated the words, feeling foreign in my mouth. Thomas had been gone for exactly 17 days, and already my son was treating me like an incompetent child rather than a woman who had supported a family and worked full-time for nearly 40 years. Look, I've researched the bus routes, Ethan continued briskly. It'll take you about an hour and 20 minutes each way with one transfer. Earlier start to your day, but the exercise will be good for you. I'll text you the details. Got a run meeting in 5. The line went dead before I could respond. I stood motionless in my kitchen, still wearing my hospital scrubs, after a 12-hour shift, surrounded by casserole dishes and sympathy cards that had arrived after Thomas's funeral. The magnitude of what had just happened slowly sank in. My son had sold my only means of transportation without asking me, without even warning me, and he expected me to be grateful. I sank into a kitchen chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Thomas would have known exactly what to say, how to handle Ethan's presumptuousness firmly, but without creating a rift. Thomas had always been the buffer between our son's increasingly materialistic outlook and my more traditional values. But Thomas wasn't here anymore. The thought brought fresh grief washing over me, a wave so powerful I had to close my eyes against it. When I could breathe again, I reached for my phone to call Diana Caldwell, Thomas's oldest friend and our family attorney. If anyone would know what to do, it would be Diana, but my finger hovered over her contact information without pressing. What exactly would I say? That my grown son had sold my car without permission, and I didn't know how to stand up to him. The humiliation burned hot in my chest. Instead, I set the phone down and walked to the window overlooking our small gravel driveway. The empty space where the Subaru had sat for a decade mocked me with its absence. Thomas had always parked it perfectly angled toward the road to make backing out easier for me. The practical implications of Ethan's actions began to cascade through my mind. My shift at the hospital started at 7 a.m. To arrive on time via the route Ethan mentioned would mean leaving by 5:30 and returning after 8 in the evening. In winter, both journeys would be in darkness. Then another realization hit me with stunning clarity: the car's title. Thomas had been meticulous about paperwork. For our 30th anniversary, he had transferred the Subaru's title solely into my name. One less thing to worry about if anything happens to me, he'd said at the time. Had Ethan even checked the registration before selling it? Did he have any legal right to sell property that wasn't his? I walked quickly to the filing cabinet in the spare bedroom where Thomas had kept all our important documents. The vehicle folder was missing. My hands began to shake as I searched more frantically through the neatly labeled sections: insurance, medical, house, deed, warranties. The entire automotive section had been removed. Ethan must have taken the documents when he came by last week, ostensibly to help organize Dad's paperwork. I'd been grateful at the time, too, overwhelmed with grief and exhaustion to question why he needed to take anything with him. I sank onto the edge of the bed, Thomas's side still undisturbed, his reading glasses still on the nightstand. The magnitude of my son's betrayal expanded like a dark stain. This wasn't impulsive. This was calculated. He had deliberately taken the documents, sold a vehicle he had no right to sell, and had the audacity to frame it as helping me. My phone buzzed with an incoming text. Ethan had sent a complicated bus schedule with multiple transfers, not the single one he'd mentioned. The journey would actually take closer to 2 hours each way. The final line read, "The exercise and fresh air will be good for you. We need to schedule a time to go through Dad's tools in the garage, too. I can probably get a decent price for them." His tools, Thomas's beloved tools collected over 40 years as a mechanic. The tools he had used to teach neighborhood kids basic car maintenance every summer. The tools that were extensions of his capable, steady hands. Something shifted inside me, then grief transforming into a cold, clear anger I had never experienced before. Thomas wouldn't have wanted me to suffer in silence. He would have expected me to stand up for myself. I picked up my phone again, but this time I didn't hesitate. "Diana," I said when she answered, "I need your help, and I need to know if there's any way to get into the Subaru's glove compartment without having the car." Diana arrived 40 minutes later, her silver hair pulled back in its usual no-nonsense bun, a leather portfolio tucked under one arm. At 72, she still practiced law part-time, specializing in elder rights and estate planning. She and Thomas had been friends since high school, bonding over a shared love of classic cars and justice in equal measure. He did what she demanded after I explained, her voice rising with indignation. She paced my small living room, the old pine floors creaking beneath her sensible shoes. "Ethan sold your car without permission, without even consulting you. He says he put the money in an account he set up for me," I explained, hearing how pathetic it sounded even as I spoke. Diana's eyes narrowed. "An account you don't control, I'm guessing. One he has access to." I nodded, shame heating my face. When had I become this person, this doormat that my own son felt comfortable walking all over? Grace, Diana said, sitting beside me on the sofa and taking my hands in hers. "This isn't just inappropriate, it's illegal. The Subaru was in your name, not his. He had no right to sell it." I swallowed hard. He took all the car documents from Thomas's filing cabinet. That's why I needed to get into the glove compartment. Thomas always kept duplicates of important papers there. A small smile played at the corners of Diana's mouth. Thomas was always prepared for every contingency. It drove me crazy in court, but it was what made him such a good mechanic. She squeezed my hands. "But there's something else you should know, Grace. Something Thomas asked me not to tell you until it became necessary." A chill ran through me despite the warm Oregon spring evening. "What is it Thomas came to see me about 3 months ago?" she said. "He'd been having some chest pains." 1. The evening after Diana's revelation felt heavier than the Oregon rain outside. Grace Whitmore sat by the kitchen window watching droplets race down the glass, each one reflecting 1,000 small memories. The old Subaru's absence still haunted the driveway. That empty rectangle of gravel looked like a scar that refused to fade. Her husband Thomas had been gone for just over 2 weeks, yet his presence lingered in every room. The worn leather gloves on the garage bench, the half-finished crossword on the dining table, the faint smell of motor oil and cedar soap he'd made himself. But now she understood Thomas hadn't simply left her behind. He had prepared her for something he never dared to explain aloud. Diana's words echoed in her mind. "He came to see me 3 months ago. He asked me to hold a sealed envelope until the time felt right." That time was now. Grace's hands trembled as she slid open the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. The ink, slightly smudged, Thomas's familiar slanted script filled the page. "My Grace," it began. "If you're reading this, I didn't make it back from the shop. Don't cry for me too long. I've had the best life a man could ask for because of you." She paused, pressing her lips together. His tone was simple, tender, but what came next stopped her breath. "You were always the heart of this family, though Ethan never saw it. I knew how the world could make women like you feel small, quiet givers in visible hands, so I made sure you'd never be powerless again." Her tears fell onto the page, blurring his words, but she kept reading. "In the garage behind the blue cabinet, there's an old watch, the one I said didn't work anymore. It does. Inside it you'll find the second key. Follow where it leads." Grace wiped her cheeks, a fragile smile flickering through her grief. Even in death, Thomas was still leading her, still loving her in that quiet, deliberate way she'd once mistaken for indifference. The garage smelled like steel and sawdust. The rain outside had softened to a drizzle, tapping rhythmically against the tin roof. Grace found the blue cabinet easily. Thomas's old toolbox stood beside it, each drawer labeled in his handwriting sockets, "Bolt Sandpaper Hope." The watch was right where he said it would be, a tarnished silver piece, the initials TW faintly etched on the back. She'd seen it countless times dangling from his vest when he tinkered with the car. The hinge resisted her trembling fingers, but when it clicked open, something metallic shifted. A folded note lay inside, and taped to it a tiny brass key, no bigger than her thumbnail. She unfolded the note carefully. "This is the key to Box 312 Evergreen Bank. The rest of my plans and your future are there." The air left her lungs in a single breath. Evergreen Bank was across town. Thomas had been. The next morning, Grace called in sick to the hospital. Her supervisor's voice was kind, almost motherly. "Take all the time you need, honey." She dressed simply, a navy raincoat, the scarf Thomas bought her in Astoria 5 winters ago. As she drove Diana's borrowed car through the drizzle, she felt both fear and purpose growing within her. At the bank, the manager, an older gentleman named Mr. Hawkins, recognized her immediately. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said softly. "Tom came in here often. Said you'd come one day. I didn't think it would be this soon." Her throat tightened. "He planned even this." Mr. Hawkins nodded solemnly and led her to a small room with beige walls and a humming fluorescent light. He placed a long metal box on the table. "This is number 312, he said. "He asked that no one but you ever open it." When the door closed, Grace stared at the box like it might breathe. Her hands trembled as she inserted the key. It wasn't full of money or jewels. Just a single velvet pouch, a flash drive, a folded envelope, and most surprisingly, a photograph. In the photo, a young Thomas stood in front of his first repair shop, Whitmore Auto and Sons. He looked younger than she'd ever seen him, holding baby Ethan in his arms. On the back, in his familiar scrawl, he'd written, "We fix what others break, including ourselves." Grace touched the image with her fingertips. The ink had faded, but the warmth in his smile hadn't. Inside the velvet pouch was another note. Thomas's voice seemed to whisper through every line. "Grace, you always believed your life was small, that you only stood behind me. But you were never behind me. You were beside me every step. Everything I built was under your name because you were my foundation. I wanted the world to see what I already knew, that the quiet woman by my side was the strongest person I ever met." Her tears came silently this time, not from pain, but from the weight of love she had never truly measured until now. As she packed everything back, the watch in her pocket began to tick softly, even though it hadn't been wound. When she lifted it to her ear, the second hand made a faint clicking sound like Morse code. Thomas had loved Morse. It had been his little hobby. Grace frowned. She remembered how he used to tap her wrist 3 times whenever he wanted to say, "I love you," without words. 3 soft ticks, then silence, then 3 again. Her chest tightened. It was the same pattern. Even from beyond, Thomas found a way to speak to her. Grace pressed the watch to her heart and closed her eyes. The world grew quiet, and in that silence she finally understood what forever really meant. That night, Grace placed the watch on her nightstand beside Thomas's reading glasses. The storm outside had cleared, and the moonlight spilled across the room like silver paint. She no longer felt abandoned. She felt chosen, protected. The grief was still there, but softer now, reshaped by gratitude. Every beat of that ticking watch reminded her love doesn't end, it just changes rooms. For years she had believed she was the background of Thomas's story. Now she saw the truth. She was the story. The one he had written in quiet gestures, small sacrifices, and an unwavering faith that she would one day stand tall without him. Grace looked out the window, the reflection of the moon glowing in her eyes. "I see you, Thomas," she whispered. "I see everything you did for me." The watch ticked once, soft, clear, and sure. She smiled through her tears, whispering to herself, "He loved me in silence, but he loved me completely." Have you ever discovered love? Only after it was gone. Press 0 if you believe love lives beyond words. Press 1 if you think it fades when silence begins. The next morning, Grace woke to the sound of rain tapping gently against the window. Oregon rain, steady and patient, like time reminding her that life still moved forward whether she was ready or not. The watch on her nightstand ticked softly, a heartbeat that seemed to whisper, "Stand up." And for the first time since Thomas's death, she did. She brewed her coffee black and strong and watched the steam curl upward. The house was still filled with quiet, not the silence of loss anymore, but the kind of stillness that comes before action. When she opened her front door to fetch the morning paper, an envelope lay on the mat, soaked slightly at the edges. Her name was written in hurried blue ink. "Mrs. Whitmore, you should check the garage. Quickly." Grace froze. The handwriting was unfamiliar. No return address. Her pulse quickened as she slipped it open. Inside was a single printed sheet, an unsigned note that read, "Ethan's been talking to a realtor about selling the Whitmore garage. He said you're not using it and he needs the money for management purposes. Check your accounts. He's been moving things." The page trembled in her hand. For a moment she thought she might faint, but instead something inside her locked into place, not rage, not fear, but clarity. Thomas had prepared her for this moment. He had given her the tools, the watch, the letter, the keys. Now it was her turn to use them. Grace grabbed her worn leather purse and drove through the rain to the local branch of Evergreen Bank. Mr. Hawkins recognized her instantly. Mrs. Whitmore back so soon, her smile was thin. "I need to check something." When he brought up her accounts, she saw it a large withdrawal pending authorization for the following week. The name on the transfer, Ethan Whitmore. Her breath caught, but her voice remained calm. "Can you cancel this transfer?" Mr. Hawkins hesitated. "Technically, it's linked to a joint access form your son filed. He said you'd agreed to let him manage. I didn't." She interrupted, her tone sharp but steady. "Cancel it and remove all secondary access rights." Mr. Hawkins blinked, surprised by her resolve. Then he nodded slowly. "Understood, Mrs. Whitmore." As she signed the forms, her hand trembled not from fear but from adrenaline. It was the first time she had ever truly fought for herself. When she stepped outside, the rain had turned into a mist. She stood beneath the gray Portland sky and whispered, "You didn't raise a fool, Thomas. You raised a fighter." By the time she reached the old Whitmore garage, the air smelled like wet pine and rust. The for sale sign leaning against the wall made her stomach twist. It was real. Ethan had been here already, taking photographs, cleaning out drawers, erasing his father's name one object at a time. Grace ran her hand along the old workbench. Each dent, each stain was a story, a memory of Thomas teaching local kids how to change tires, of laughter and sweat, of a man who believed that honest hands built honest lives. And now her son wanted to turn that into cash. Her eyes caught something tucked behind the old tool chest, a dusty binder labeled Whitmore Mechanics LLC, Ownership and Assets. She opened it, and there it was, every document Thomas had prepared, listing her as the sole owner of the garage and all affiliated properties. At the bottom of the last page, Thomas had written in pen for Grace, "When she finally realizes she's stronger than she thinks." Grace pressed the binder to her chest. For years she'd been quiet, patient, polite, but not anymore. Her phone buzzed. "Ethan." "Mom," his voice came through briskly. "Hey, listen, I found a great offer for Dad's old place. It's outdated anyway. I'm just trying to handle the business side for you." "You don't need to worry, Ethan," she said softly, her voice calm but carrying steel beneath. "You don't have my permission to sell anything." There was a pause, then an incredulous laugh. "Mom, come on. You don't understand. I understand more than you think," she said, "and I'm done letting you make decisions for me." He tried to argue, but she ended the call mid-sentence. The silence afterward was deafening, but it felt good. It felt right. That afternoon, she drove straight to Diana Caldwell's office. The rain had finally stopped. Sunlight peeked through the clouds, scattering gold across the wet streets. When Grace stepped inside, Diana looked up and smiled knowingly. "You found something, didn't you?" Grace placed the binder on her desk. "Everything Thomas owned, and it's all in my name." Diana exhaled a slow whistle. "Well, sweetheart, you've got more leverage than you think. Ethan's been bluffing with no cards." Grace chuckled softly. "He won't like that." Diana leaned forward. "That's not your problem anymore. Now you decide the rules." For the first time, Grace felt what power truly meant. Not control, not wealth, but the quiet certainty that she was no longer afraid. That night, she sat on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the lake shimmer under the moonlight. She opened Thomas's watch again. 3 ticks. Pause. 3 ticks. "I'm doing it, love," she whispered. "I'm standing up." The ticking matched her heartbeat, steady, calm, unstoppable. In that stillness, she realized something. Courage isn't loud. It's the quiet decision to keep going, even when your hands shake. It's choosing dignity over noise. A few days later, a knock came at the door. On the porch stood Victor Reyes, the building manager from the apartment complex Ethan lived in. He looked nervous. "Mrs. Whitmore, I hope I'm not intruding, but I think you should know your son has been telling people he already owns your house and garage. He's been, well, arrogant about it." Grace thanked him. "You did the right thing, Victor." She closed the door and smiled faintly. The pieces were falling into place. Thomas had left her a map, and now she was following it step by careful step. Later that week, Grace visited the garage again, cleaned the dust from the sign, and hung it proudly back over the door. Whitmore Mechanics, established 1989. She didn't call Ethan. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. Instead, she took a photo of the newly restored sign and sent it anonymously to a Reddit thread titled Reddit Revenge Stories. Her caption was simple: "When your son tries to sell your husband's legacy and you remind him who built it." The post exploded overnight. People commented things like, "Grace is the real hero," and "This feels like one of those classic Reddit revenge stories where justice speaks softly but hits hard." Grace smiled when she read them. She didn't need fame, but she liked the irony. Even online strangers could sense what Ethan couldn't: the quiet fire of a woman reborn. As one commenter wrote, "Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. It's living with dignity." She whispered to herself, "Exactly." By the week's end, the accounts were secure, the garage was hers again, and the fear was gone. She stood outside the shop, wind in her gray hair heart steady. Thomas's watch ticked against her wrist like a living heartbeat. She smiled at the horizon. "See, Thomas, I can do this." The wind carried no answer, just the faint metallic rhythm of courage. The following evening, the rain had stopped. The air outside smelled of wet cedar and renewal. Grace sat at the kitchen table, the same one where she'd once shared late-night coffee with Thomas after long shifts at the hospital. Before her lay the flash drive she'd found in the safe deposit box, small, unassuming, wrapped in a strip of masking tape with one word scrawled in ink: play. Her fingers hovered over the laptop's USB port for several seconds. It wasn't fear, this time it was reverence, like touching something holy. When she finally slid it in, the computer chimed softly. A single folder appeared for Grace. "When she's ready." She clicked it open. Inside were scanned documents, PDFs, and one video file labeled legacy.mov. Her breath hitched. She clicked it. Thomas appeared on screen, sitting in his familiar flannel shirt at the garage workbench. His hair was grayer, his eyes softer, and behind him hung the Whitmore Mechanics sign she'd just restored days before. "Hey there, sweetheart," he began, smiling shyly at the camera. "If you're seeing this, it means I didn't get the chance to say everything in person. So, this is my second chance." Grace covered her mouth, tears blurring the image. She could almost smell the oil and hear the faint hum of his favorite old country station in the background. "I know you never liked big surprises," he chuckled, "but I had to make sure you'd be okay even when I'm not around to fix things." He reached for a folder off camera and set it down. "These are properties I started buying years ago under your name. A few small shops, apartments, a warehouse or two. Nothing fancy at first, but they grew, Grace. They really grew." He paused, his voice catching just slightly. "I wanted you to live free. Not just financially free from worry, free from people who think kindness means weakness. You've always been the strongest person I know, even when you couldn't see it." Grace pressed her palm against the laptop screen. The tears came slow and quiet now, not from grief, but from awe. She had known Thomas was a planner, a man of quiet deeds, but this was devotion turned into design. He wasn't just leaving her property, he was leaving her peace. When the video ended, the screen went black, but something clinked softly inside the small plastic case of the flash drive. Grace turned it over and noticed a thin crack at the back, and inside, wedged between layers of casing, was an old cassette tape labeled Side B. Her breath caught. Thomas had stopped using tapes decades ago. She rummaged through his old boxes until she found the dusty cassette player he'd once used to record customer notes. The batteries were corroded, but after a few replacements and one deep breath, the player clicked alive, static. Then his voice, low, steady, almost whispering. "Grace, if you've made it this far, you're stronger than I imagined. I didn't record this for instructions, I recorded it for faith." Her eyes flooded again. "Every tool I left behind, every key, every plan, they mean nothing without you. You were my compass, the reason I believed in building things that last. If I ever taught you anything, I hope it's this: don't be afraid to take up space in the world. You've earned it." He paused, then said softly, "And tell Ethan, I forgave him before he even broke your heart, because that's what fathers do. But don't let him break you." Then silence, a soft mechanical click as the tape ended. Grace sat motionless for several minutes, her fingers pressed to her lips. That voice, that unwavering calm, carried her through the storm of the last few weeks, and suddenly she saw everything differently. Thomas hadn't simply protected her, he had prepared her. Every secret he left was not about control, but about trust. She opened the other files on the flash drive. Inside was a complete list of properties, 17 apartments, 4 commercial lots, and 1 undeveloped parcel labeled Whitmore Hills. Attached was a document with Naomi Patel's name, property manager authorization. Thomas had already chosen the right people to stand by her. He had seen the future coming and built a shield of decency and structure around her name. Grace leaned back overwhelmed. Her whole life she'd believed she was ordinary, a background character in her husband's story. But this proved she was the center of it. She thought of the thousands of people online reading Reddit family tales, stories of parents-children betrayal and love. If only they knew that the truest family tale wasn't always about revenge, but revelation. Love could be an empire built in silence. Days later, she drove out to see the undeveloped property marked Whitmore Hills. The dirt road curved through tall pines and opened onto a clearing that overlooked the water. There, nailed to an old oak tree, was a sign Thomas had left future site, Grace's workshop. She laughed through her tears. He had known, he always knew, that she'd need a place to create, to heal, to belong. The wind picked up, whispering through the branches. It felt like he was there. For the first time, she didn't feel like the widow left behind. She felt like the woman chosen to carry forward something holy. That evening, she placed the watch beside the cassette on her nightstand. The two seemed to hum together, tiny relics of a man who understood love not as noise but as rhythm. Grace whispered into the stillness, "You didn't just leave me things, Thomas. You left me light." The room felt warmer, the air calmer. Outside, the lake reflected a perfect full moon. She realized she no longer feared the quiet because it was filled with him. Before sleeping, Grace logged online not to read about herself, but to post under a thread titled Reddit Family Tales. Her caption was simple: "My husband planned a future I didn't know existed. He left me courage, not money. I used to think silence meant absence. Now I know sometimes silence is the sound of love that never ends." Comments poured in. "This isn't just a story. It's a legacy. Sounds like something out of heaven itself." She smiled faintly. People across the world, strangers with tired hearts, were feeling Thomas's love too. It wasn't just her revelation now, it was everyone's. That night, as she drifted to sleep, she thought of the cassette tape, the USB, and the sign nailed to that oak tree. All of it was his final message: love doesn't vanish, it transforms. She whispered one last time, "You were my beginning, Thomas, but this is our continuation." The watch ticked once, slow, sure, sacred. Do you think this voice feels real, like Thomas is still speaking through it? If not quite yet, press 0. If it touched your heart, press 1. The morning sun streamed through the lace curtains of Grace's kitchen, touching the edges of the table where the USB and cassette still rested side by side. The rain had stopped for good. A still, bright calm hung over Portland, as if even the sky was holding its breath. Grace poured herself a cup of tea instead of coffee this time. The bitterness of grief had faded, replaced by a softer strength, a peace that didn't come from forgetting, but from understanding. She had spent the last few nights listening again to Thomas's voice on that cassette. Each word had carved new courage into her bones, and now she was ready. At 9 a.m., she walked into the downtown office of Whitmore Holdings, Thomas's investment and property management company. The receptionist looked up startled. The quiet widow of the founder was not someone they saw often. "I'd like to see Miss Patel," Grace said gently. When Naomi Patel appeared, she was as poised as ever, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes softened by empathy. She had worked with Thomas for years, quietly keeping everything running. "Mrs. Whitmore," Naomi said with a warm smile, "I was just about to call you. There's something you should know." Grace nodded. "Let's sit." They stepped into a small conference room. The walls were glass overlooking the city. Grace could see her own reflection faintly, an older woman's silver hair, neatly pinned, posture straight. For the first time, she liked what she saw. Naomi slid a folder across the table. "Your son Ethan came here 2 days ago. He tried to take control of the management account, said you were too ill to handle business." Grace didn't flinch. "Did he bring proof, a forged letter apparently from you?" Naomi replied quietly. "I didn't believe it. Thomas told me long ago, if you ever doubt who's telling the truth, look at the one who doesn't raise their voice." Grace smiled faintly. "That sounds like him." Naomi continued. "The board wants clarification. If you'd like, we can call an emergency session today." Grace said, her voice calm but absolute. By noon, Grace stood before a polished mahogany table surrounded by 6 executives, all men who had once worked under her husband. Ethan sat near the end, crisp suit, fake confidence, barely masking irritation. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he said through gritted teeth. Grace didn't look at him. She opened the folder Naomi had prepared, ownership deeds, legal documents, the video Thomas had recorded for her. "I'm here," she said evenly to clarify ownership and management. She played a brief clip from the video. Thomas's voice filled the room. "Everything in Whitmore Holdings belongs to Grace Whitmore. She has the final word. She is my partner, not my dependent." No one spoke. The authority in Thomas's tone was undeniable. Ethan's face went pale. "Mom, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," she interrupted gently. "You sold my car, tried to sell my home, and forged my name. You've made your choices. Now I'll make mine." Her words weren't loud, but they struck like quiet thunder. She turned to the board. "As of today, Ethan is no longer authorized to represent Whitmore Holdings in any capacity." Naomi handed over the formal papers. The men nodded one by one, respectful, not out of pity, but out of recognition. For the first time they saw what Thomas had seen all along: the woman behind the empire. Ethan stormed out, muttering something about betrayal. Grace didn't chase him. Some lessons needed silence to echo properly. Naomi placed a hand over Grace's. "You handled that beautifully." Grace exhaled slowly. "I didn't want revenge, just clarity." Naomi smiled. "That's what real power looks like." They shared tea afterward in Naomi's office. Through the window, the city glowed, cranes, rooftops, the steady pulse of progress. Grace looked out and whispered, "Thomas built this, but he built me first." That night, Grace returned home. She placed the board documents in the drawer beside the cassette, then walked to the mirror. Her reflection no longer looked fragile. It looked complete. Power, she realized, didn't roar. It breathed. It walked softly through hallways that used to intimidate you and smiled at the walls that once held you back. She whispered to her reflection, "I'm not afraid anymore." The woman staring back didn't just look like a widow, she looked like a leader. The next morning, a small envelope arrived in her mailbox. The handwriting was careful, uncertain. Inside was a note from a man named Louise Harper, one of Thomas's former mechanics at the old garage. "Mrs. Whitmore, I just wanted to say thank you. I heard what happened at the company meeting. Mr. Whitmore always said you were the quiet force behind everything. The guys at the shop, we believe that too. We've renamed the tool room Grace's Bay. Thought you should know." She pressed the letter to her heart, overcome by quiet emotion. There it was again, Thomas's reach, still guiding the world in gentle ripples. She wrote back simply, "Keep fixing what others break. That's what Thomas would want, and that's what I'll keep doing too." In the following weeks, Grace began learning everything she could about the business. Naomi visited her, often explaining leases, taxes, contracts, things Grace once thought were beyond her grasp. But each day, her confidence grew. When tenants came to her with questions, she didn't defer. She listened, decided, acted. Her voice was calm, her presence steady, and people noticed. At 60, Grace was doing what many never dared to, claiming her space, not by force, but by presence. She had become the living embodiment of Thomas's quiet philosophy: power doesn't shout. It simply is. One evening, she stood outside the newly painted garage sign, Whitmore Mechanics, family built, family run. The sunset turned the letters gold. The air smelled of oil wood and new beginnings. She felt Thomas beside her, though she knew he wasn't there. "I hope I'm doing it right," she murmured. A breeze swept through, brushing against her hair, soft as an answer. She smiled. "I'll take that as a yes." Grace had spent her whole life being polite, waiting her turn, softening her voice. Now she understood something profound. She didn't need to prove her worth. She was her worth. And when a woman finally realizes that the world around her listens, the air outside smelled of summer rain and redemption. A month had passed since the boardroom meeting, since Grace had reclaimed what was hers with quiet authority. Under her leadership, Whitmore Holdings was steady again. Naomi Patel had helped her modernize the systems, organize staff meetings, and set up transparent accounting. The business that had once felt like a labyrinth now moved to the rhythm of her own calm determination. And though the company name still read Whitmore, everyone understood that its heartbeat now came from her. She had not seen Ethan since that day. He had stopped calling, stopped pretending to be concerned. The silence between them was heavy, but not painful anymore. It was simply space where truth had finally settled. One Friday afternoon, Naomi walked into Grace's office with a hesitant look. "Grace, there's something you might want to see," she said, handing her a stack of rental reports. Grace adjusted her reading glasses and skimmed through the pages. Then she paused. Unit 4B, Tenant Horizon Venture LLC. Rent overdue 3 months. She frowned slightly. "Who's that?" Naomi hesitated. "That's Ethan's new company. He's leasing an office in one of our downtown buildings under your portfolio." Grace set the paper down, her heart oddly calm. "He doesn't know, does he know? He signed through a broker. He probably assumed Whitmore Holdings was just another property firm." Grace nodded slowly. "Send a notice. Standard procedure." Naomi searched her face. "You sure?" Grace smiled gently. "Naomi, justice doesn't need to shout. It just needs to happen." 3 days later, the phone rang. Naomi picked up. Grace watched quietly as her assistant's polite tone shifted into something firmer. "Yes, Mr. Whitmore," Naomi said, glancing at Grace. "We understand the situation, but unfortunately, overdue rent is overdue rent. Our owner's policy is clear." There was a pause, then a muffled male voice, sharp pleading. Grace could recognize that voice even through the wall. Naomi continued, "You'll need to clear the balance within 10 business days or vacate." "Yes, the owner's decision is final." When she hung up, Naomi looked uncertain. "He's angry, said he'll call his lawyer." Grace just smiled faintly. "He can call whoever he likes. The policy applies to everyone." Her tone wasn't cruel, just factual. The same quiet composure Thomas once had when fixing an engine. Tighten what's loose, replace what's broken, move on. A week later, Ethan showed up at the Whitmore office. He looked thinner, tired, his confidence replaced by desperation. "Mom," he began, stepping into her office without waiting to be invited. "Can we talk?" Grace gestured toward the chair across from her desk. "Of course." He sat clutching a folder. "Look, I didn't know that building was yours. If I did, I'd have come directly to you. The rent issue, it's just a cash flow thing, a temporary hiccup." Grace studied him quietly, then spoke in her calm, deliberate tone. "Ethan, the system you tried to manipulate is the same one that protects everyone equally, including you." He frowned. "So you're not going to help me, I am helping you," she said softly, "by letting consequences teach what words never could." He looked up, eyes dark with disbelief. "You're really going to evict your own son?" Grace's voice didn't waver. "No, Ethan, the company will. I just happen to own it." He stared at her, searching for the woman he once thought he could control. But the mother before him wasn't fragile anymore. "Dad would never," he began, but she stopped him with one raised hand. "Your father believed in fairness," she said. "He forgave you before he died. But forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. I'm not punishing you, Ethan. I'm just not protecting you from what you've done." The silence that followed was heavy yet oddly peaceful. Ethan's jaw tightened. He gathered his papers and stood up. "Fine, do what you want." Grace smiled gently. "I already am." He left without another word. When the door closed, Grace looked at the watch on her wrist, Thomas's old one. It ticked slowly, evenly, as if keeping score of a universe that finally found balance. 2 weeks later, Grace received a call from a local journalist who had covered Whitmore Holdings' charitable work years ago. "Mrs. Whitmore, we're doing a piece on legacy leadership. May we interview you?" Grace hesitated, then agreed. During the interview, the reporter asked, "What's changed most since your husband's passing?" Grace smiled. "Everything except integrity. Thomas built on it. I just polished the foundation." When the article came out, the headline read, "The Quiet Power of Grace Whitmore, How She Leads with Calm and Conscience." The piece mentioned her new mentorship program for young women in business, something she had quietly launched with Naomi's help. It never mentioned Ethan. It didn't need to. The truth had already written itself like poetry, measured, inevitable, and complete. One late evening, Grace stopped by the downtown property herself. The office lights were off. Ethan's company sign had been removed. Through the glass, she could see cleaning crews wiping down desks, the cycle of endings and beginnings continuing like clockwork. She didn't feel triumph, only stillness. Justice had done its work. As she turned to leave, she noticed a single envelope taped to the door, her name written in Ethan's handwriting. Inside was a short note. "Mom, I was wrong. About Dad. About you. About everything. You didn't destroy me, you just let me see myself. I'll do better." She folded the letter gently, her eyes glistening. "Good," she whispered. "That's all I ever wanted." At home, Grace lit a small candle beside Thomas's watch and cassette. She didn't pray, she simply sat in gratitude. The world had unfolded exactly as it should. She hadn't sought revenge, and yet justice had come quiet, symmetrical, inevitable. For years she thought power meant control. Now she knew it meant peace. Poetic justice wasn't about punishment. It was about harmony life restoring itself to truth. And in that truth, she found freedom. Grace stood by the window watching the city lights flicker. Somewhere out there, her son was starting over. And for the first time, she hoped he would succeed, not because she saved him, but because life had taught him what love could not. She smiled softly. Justice doesn't need an audience. It just needs time. The watch ticked once, then twice, a rhythm steady as forgiveness. The first days of autumn came softly to Portland, the kind of days where the air turns gold and the light moves slower across the window glass. Grace sat on the back porch of her home, wrapped in her favorite shawl. The world around her had grown quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet she'd known before. This one was full of understanding, full of peace, full of life, continuing on its own gentle rhythm. The faint sound of the lake lapping against the shore mixed with the soft ticking of Thomas's old watch. It had been weeks since Ethan's letter. He hadn't called, and she hadn't expected him to. Some distances weren't meant to be closed overnight. But that note, "You didn't destroy me, you just let me see myself," had stayed on her nightstand beside Thomas's photograph. She often looked at it not with pain anymore, but with gratitude. It was proof that truth given time could heal what anger never could. The visit one crisp Saturday morning, Grace heard footsteps on her porch. When she opened the door, Ethan was standing there. He looked older, somehow less sure of himself, more human. He held a small box in his hands. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. "Hi, Ethan." For a long moment they simply looked at each other, two people who had walked through fire and somehow found their way back to calm. He handed her the box. "I was cleaning out the old garage office. Found this in one of Dad's drawers. I think it's meant for you." Grace took it carefully. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a tiny wrench keychain, the same one Thomas used to give to his customers after every repair. The note, written in his unmistakable hand, said, "For the woman who fixes hearts better than I ever fixed cars." Grace's throat tightened. He always knew how to say the right thing, she whispered. Ethan nodded. Yeah, he really did. They sat together on the porch steps, the autumn air cool but gentle. Ethan broke the silence first. "I was angry at you for not bailing me out, but you were right. I needed to fail to see myself clearly." Grace smiled softly. "You needed the silence, Ethan. Sometimes that's where truth speaks the loudest." He looked down, his voice small. "Do you forgive me?" She reached over, placing her hand lightly on his. "I already did. Long before you asked. Forgiveness isn't something we earn. It's something we give so we can breathe again." A tear slipped down his cheek. This time Grace didn't look away. Later that day they drove together to the old Whitmore garage. The doors creaked open, and the smell of metal sawdust and memories filled the air. Dust danced in the sunlight as it streamed through the high windows. The place hadn't changed much, the same workbenches, the same worn stools, even Thomas's old toolbox still in the corner. Grace walked slowly to the center of the room and ran her hand along the wooden counter. "Your father built this place with his hands," she said, "but he built us with his heart." Ethan stood beside her, silent. She turned to him. "I'm not angry anymore, Ethan. I just hope you find what he found here, purpose. Not money, not power. Purpose." He nodded quietly. "I think I finally understand." Grace smiled. "Good. Then help me clean this place up. It's time it lived again." They spent the afternoon sweeping, organizing tools, and airing out the dust. For the first time in years, laughter, soft, real, unguarded, filled the room again. 2 weeks later, Grace posted a simple sign outside the garage, "Whitmore Workshop, Community Learning Space." She and Naomi had transformed it into a weekend center where retired mechanics, young apprentices, and single parents could come learn practical skills free of charge. It was Thomas's dream reborn in a new form. Every Saturday, Grace welcomed people with a pot of coffee and a story. Sometimes she spoke about Thomas's quiet wisdom. Sometimes she talked about courage and forgiveness. But most of the time, she just listened. Ethan joined her on weekends, helping to repair bikes for neighborhood kids. The first time she saw him hand a wrench to a little boy and say, "Don't be afraid to try again," she felt something inside her settle completely. The circle had closed, not perfectly, but truthfully. One evening, as the last visitor left the workshop, Grace lingered by the door. The golden hour light spilled across the floor, and dust shimmered like stars caught in midair. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thomas, I did it. I kept your promise. But more than that, I finally kept mine to myself." The wind slipped through the open window, brushing her cheek like a tender hand. For the first time since he passed, she felt no longing, no sorrow, only connection. He was everywhere now, in the hum of the tools, in Ethan's laughter, in the rhythm of her own steady heart. Forgiveness hadn't erased the past. It had simply freed her from carrying it. That night she returned home and wrote a letter to herself, something she'd learned to do after therapy. She wrote, "Dear Grace, you have learned that peace doesn't arrive with an apology. It arrives when you stop needing one. You have learned that love outlives the body. That silence can heal louder than shouting ever could. And that forgiveness isn't surrender, it's liberation." She folded the note and placed it beside Thomas's watch, now ticking steadily in perfect rhythm. The house felt lighter, not empty, but whole. Weeks later, the workshop buzzed with laughter again. Naomi dropped by bringing muffins for the volunteers. Ethan was fixing a mower in the corner, humming a tune his father used to sing. Grace watched him for a long moment, then stepped outside. The air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. She looked out at the Lake Portland's water, reflecting the last colors of sunset. For years she had lived in the shadow of loss. Now she stood in the light of forgiveness. "Thomas," she whispered, her eyes soft with gratitude. "I did it." And for the first time in her long, beautiful life, she smiled light as the evening breeze, calm as the water's glow. Grace's story wasn't about revenge or wealth. It was about rediscovering power through gentleness, strength through stillness, and peace through forgiveness. She learned that justice can set things right, but only forgiveness sets you free. And that's what every listener, every heart carrying a wound can take from her story. Don't wait for someone else to make peace with you. Make peace with yourself first. Thank you, my dear friends, for walking through Grace's journey with me, from betrayal to forgiveness, from silence to peace. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment below to share your thoughts. Tell me where you're watching from and join me next time for another powerful story here on I Sold Your Car. 4 words delivered with such casual cruelty that at first I thought I'd misheard my son. "Ethan, what did you say?" My voice sounded strange in the quiet kitchen of our lakeside home in Portland, too high and thin against the steady hum of the refrigerator Thomas had fixed just 3 weeks before his heart gave out. I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story from. I want to know how far it's traveled, because this story is going to leave you speechless. The Subaru Mom. I sold it yesterday. Got $8,000 for it, which is pretty good for a 10-year-old car. The satisfaction in his voice made my stomach clench. I've already put the money into an account I set up to manage your finances. You need to be practical now that Dad's gone. I gripped the counter to steady myself, staring at the faded wallpaper Thomas and I had hung together when we first bought this small house 26 years ago. The Subaru had been Thomas's pride, a reliable sedan he'd maintained meticulously, teaching me basic maintenance so I'd never be stranded or taken advantage of by unscrupulous mechanics. "But I need that car for work," I managed to say, trying to keep the panic from my voice. "The hospital is across town. There's no direct bus route." Ethan's sigh crackled through the phone, impatient and dismissive. "Mom, be realistic. You're 58. Should you even be working at your age? Besides, the insurance and maintenance would have been too expensive for you on your own." On my own, I repeated the words, feeling foreign in my mouth. Thomas had been gone for exactly 17 days, and already my son was treating me like an incompetent child rather than a woman who had supported a family and worked full-time for nearly 40 years. "Look, I've researched the bus routes," Ethan continued briskly. "It'll take you about an hour and 20 minutes each way with one transfer. Earlier start to your day, but the exercise will be good for you. I'll text you the details. Got a run meeting in 5. The line went dead before I could respond. I stood motionless in my kitchen, still wearing my hospital scrubs, after a 12-hour shift, surrounded by casserole dishes and sympathy cards that had arrived after Thomas's funeral. The magnitude of what had just happened slowly sank in. My son had sold my only means of transportation without asking me, without even warning me, and he expected me to be grateful. I sank into a kitchen chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Thomas would have known exactly what to say, how to handle Ethan's presumptuousness firmly, but without creating a rift. Thomas had always been the buffer between our son's increasingly materialistic outlook and my more traditional values. But Thomas wasn't here anymore. The thought brought fresh grief washing over me, a wave so powerful I had to close my eyes against it. When I could breathe again, I reached for my phone to call Diana Caldwell, Thomas's oldest friend and our family attorney. If anyone would know what to do, it would be Diana, but my finger hovered over her contact information without pressing. What exactly would I say? That my grown son had sold my car without permission, and I didn't know how to stand up to him. The humiliation burned hot in my chest. Instead, I set the phone down and walked to the window overlooking our small gravel driveway. The empty space where the Subaru had sat for a decade mocked me with its absence. Thomas had always parked it perfectly angled toward the road to make backing out easier for me. The practical implications of Ethan's actions began to cascade through my mind. My shift at the hospital started at 7 a.m. To arrive on time via the route Ethan mentioned would mean leaving by 5:30 and returning after 8 in the evening. In winter, both journeys would be in darkness. Then another realization hit me with stunning clarity: the car's title. Thomas had been meticulous about paperwork. For our 30th